Hey everybody, I think we're live now. It looks that way at least. I'm Grae. I'm here with Laura at Thinkful.
Hello.
I do education operations over here. Laura does other stuff related to people.
Yep, community awesomeness.
Community stuff. We're here today with a bunch of people from Thinkful. I'll introduce them kind of one by one. What we're going to do today is talk a little bit about which programming language might be a good option to get started with. And I think in the end, the answer is going to, everyone's going to have the same answer, which will largely be, it kind of depends on what you want to do, but there are a lot of fun things to kind of fight about, so we'll get into that too a little bit. So I'll just introduce the other folks that we're here with today. So we've got Saul. Saul is our senior engineer over here. He is an avid Pythonista. He's, I believe, still heavily involved with the NYC Python group and digs Python. And then we've got Olex. Olex is also an engineer over here. He's the most recent addition to the engineering team. We're happy to have him. He is rooting for Ruby today, and I think he actually likes Ruby. I don't think he's just saying it. Yeah. And then we've got Jeremy. Jeremy is one of the mentors for our iOS course. He's also contributing to the Swift version of the iOS curriculum. He will be advocating Swift. He's probably, and I'm not really exaggerating, he's probably one of the most up-to-date people on using Swift in an educational capacity, one of the most up-to-date people in the world. Finally, we've got Evan. Evan is a full-stack JavaScript developer over here. He was also the first full-time hire we had at Thinkful for engineering, and it was a sad, sad place before he came around, so we're glad to have him. He's going to be advocating for JavaScript today. Anyway, I'll start things off, and let's see, who might, Olex, I'm going to pick on you because I can. So what, for somebody looking to get into programming today, like what language should they start off with and why?
So it really depends on whether you're interested in programming in general or web development, which is now comprising an ever-increasing amount of code that is used, and how close you want to be to the end user. So if you want to be in the browser, making games, making highly interactive stuff, I think the clear choice is JavaScript. And then as you get to the server side, I think the choice expands to JavaScript, Ruby, or Python, because they're all great at making servers, and they have different advantages there, as I'm sure Saul will get into. And then if you're looking to make non-web stuff, there's other options.
Yeah. So why Ruby over, say, Python or JavaScript if you're doing server side?
So Ruby, Python, and JavaScript are not very recent additions to, or they've been around for at least 5 years on the server side. They're all very well developed communities. Before that, you would have something like Java or C making servers, but nowadays, those three languages have the best server-side components. And Ruby specifically has this library called Rails, which is just a brilliant community, tons of contributors, and very sort of almost beautiful goals. And yeah, so Ruby excels at web development and just the back end in general, serving up web pages.
Yeah, Rails is pretty popular right now, and lots of fun to work with. Saul, I know you're very opinionated on this matter. What do you think? I mean, what language should people start with if they're just getting into programming?
Opinionated? No, not at all. I didn't write that. So I think I agree with Olex in that it depends on what you want to do. I would say that if you just want to do web development and that's all you want to do, and you're willing to go through the trouble of actually learning Ruby and Rails, more importantly, you probably should go that route, because that's the most stable route, the most finished route. It's the route where you will find less things that don't make sense, maybe. That being said, if you want to get into coding to like understand programming and understand computing and computers in general, I say it's better for you to start with Python, because even though Python might not be the best at building websites, it's pretty good, but it's not the best. I'd say Python's not the best at anything, but it doesn't fail at anything, and thus by learning Python you will be able to do lots and lots of things with your computer that you might not do with some other languages.
Yeah, so I heard somebody say recently that Python was the second best language for just about everything. Do you agree with that? Is that accurate as far as you're concerned?
I completely agree with that statement. Yeah, I think it's almost never the best tool, but it's almost always close to being the best tool, which is really good, because if you just want to learn one thing, that's probably the one you want to have in your tool belt.
Yeah, cool. Jeremy, I'll switch over to you. So you're a mobile developer in a sea today of web developers. What do you think is a good option for people to get started with if they're headed towards mobile development?
Well, I think, yeah, it's a pretty clear choice. If you're looking to get started in mobile app development, you definitely want to be on the Apple platform. I think it's got a lot of the great tools. It's got a great community as well. And now it's got a great new language as well called Swift. Objective-C used to be my favorite language, and I'm quickly learning that Swift is going to be that favorite language. Sorry, Python was my second favorite, and now it's going to be relegated to probably third or fourth. Sorry. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting mix of folks here. I think there's a lot of debate around what should be on the server side, but for me, there's a clear choice on the mobile app side of things. Java, we have no Java folks here today, and it's easy to pick on them maybe, but yeah, I'm in the Apple camp.
Yeah. So what about maybe a more contentious question for somebody who's just getting started and they're trying to decide between mobile development or web development? Do you have any help for people making that decision?
The folks I talk to when I'm mentoring, they have a specific idea about something they want to build, and usually it's something in their hand, it's on their phone. Working with iOS and working with Swift now, you get a chance to actually build something that you can use right away. If you're building a server-side thing, really it's a bigger, larger problem to solve, and we've got some great folks to teach that kind of thing. But is it specific and small, or is it large and a little more generic?
Mm-hmm. Cool. So that brings me to you, Evan. So a lot of people today are learning JavaScript as their first language. Is that a good idea? Is that something you recommend?
Learning JavaScript will certainly give you the greatest ability in the shortest amount of time. Whether that's a good thing or not, it's not clear. Learning JavaScript allows you to put up a server and put up your website at the same time. And when you get advanced, then you can even share actual code between the two sides that makes sense, which has been a dream of web development for, I think, pretty much as long as it's been around, at least in recent times. I don't know. It's hold on, sorry. It's something that I am fascinated with, basically where those two platforms overlap and what you can achieve by basically having, commonality between the two sides. As a language, it's awful. It is a bad language. We talked about this often. It's not good. It's not performant, and it's not particularly easy to master. It's easy to understand, but there are many subtle bugs that will basically confuse people as they learn it. They'll spend hours debugging something because there's just a very odd, rule in that you have to learn about as you go along, and it's going to be painful. To help you with that, there have been things that have come along, like Coffeescript. It's probably a bad idea to start out learning that, because when you have to debug it, you're not going to understand what's going on when you open it up. But what Coffeescript is that it's sort of an exercise. It was an exercise by Jeremy Ashkenaz to, basically see what could be done and come up with a language that he would prefer to write in. And what he ended up with is something that looks like Python or Ruby. You know, I would say probably a little bit more like Python. But it's definitely something that can make doing development easier and something to look at, especially after you have an understanding of the basics.
Yeah. So you mentioned server-side development with JavaScript. I think you're talking about Node. A lot of people kind of hear about Node but don't really know what it is. Can you just say a little bit more like what that is and why that makes JavaScript more interesting as a language?
Node.js is it's a platform to run JavaScript outside of a browser, and doing that allows you to serve up files. If you happen to want to have a website, it allows you to use it for writing scripts on your own computer to do certain things. It's basically synonymous with web development today because of tools like Grunt and Bower and countless others that are all written in JavaScript. And if you're going to actually produce a good site, you're going to end up using those tools. And that means that you almost are exposed to JavaScript and Node.js regardless. So learning it up front is sort of valuable if you plan to do web development.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Question from the interwebs. Michael Herman says that the web still uses a lot of PHP. Are there any particular reasons that you would go about why not learn PHP?
Because it's an awful language, and I never want anyone to have to see it again.
Okay.
If I could go back in time and do one thing, I would never allow him to write that language. There are many worse things, but I would never allow him to write PHP.
Olex, is that your opinion, or are you going to advocate for PHP?
Sure. So PHP is still the only language you can use to create WordPress themes. But outside of sort of like base level CMS development, and it's very much on the decline. If you're looking to make a big app, I don't think that you should look at anything other than JavaScript, Python, and Ruby. And to what Evan was saying about JavaScript, it seems that JavaScript is almost like a lower level, even though it has the same capabilities of the other dynamic languages do, Ruby and Python. But in Python, in JavaScript, you kind of have to construct it from this sort of like from the JavaScript that it is into sort of more dynamic concepts that you get in Python and Ruby.
Yeah. So that's a question that we've been kind of the PHP thing in particular is something that we've been kind of wrestling with over Thinkful. Like, do we put a PHP course together? It's really popular. It's getting a lot of use nowadays, but we see it as kind of declining, and for that reason, we haven't prioritized it for one of our classes.
PHP has been historically really hacked together, and I think Saul can speak more to this perhaps, but it's just a really underthought language, like somebody just threw it together without really thinking about it. And I think the long-term value of PHP is not nearly as high as any of the other three that we talked about.
So I have a question for you guys. How did you get started in choosing your respective languages, and how was that learning curve initially?
I'm gonna start with Saul. Saul, I don't think Python was your first language, but when did you come to it?
Python's definitely not my first language. I was actually, this is kind of shameful, but I was actually a Rubyist in a previous life. Till I found my calling and I started doing Python, and I've never looked back.
What initially kind of got you interested in it?
So there are really similar languages with a really overlapping set of features and several things that are exactly the same. What really drew me to Python was the ability to access the internals of the language to a degree. Both Ruby and Python are written in C, so you can kind of like hack your way to the lower level of the programming language. And then also, Python has an incredibly mature and powerful scientific library distribution called SciPy, which will basically let you do anything you want with your data. So that's something that's, it's hardly replicated. You can talk maybe about R, maybe about Julia, MATLAB if you hit yourself, but it's basically the bleeding edge of what data analysis is.
Yeah, cool. So Jeremy, quick question: was Objective-C your first language, or did you get started with something different?
No, yeah, BASIC on old Tandy computers was my first language back in the day. I came to Objective-C kind of on a roundabout way. I was working on a cross-platform application project, and I was working on the Windows side of things, and the Mac guy kept showing me these great little language features that he was working on, these great frameworks, and I gradually kind of shifted into his camp, and I've kind of been in there ever since.
Yeah, so Saul mentioned third-party libraries in Python. In formerly Objective-C, now Swift, I think libraries play a huge role in development. Can you talk just for a minute about the role of Apple-developed libraries in developing with Swift?
Yeah, you bet. So Apple provides a pretty strong set of frameworks and really powerful things to help you get the job done. But there's also a really strong community that the open source community has put together. Similar to Gems or Pip, we've got the idea of CocoaPods. These are kind of concrete little blocks you can plug into your app and kind of use them right off the shelf. I use them in almost every app that I build. There's some components I keep coming back to, so I keep wanting to kind of give back into that community.
Yeah, excellent. So Evan, was JavaScript your first language, or did you get started with something different?
JavaScript was not my first language. If I was being honest, I'd actually say that my first language was PHP back when I was 14. But I would say that my first real language was Java originally, because that's what I studied academically. I mean, that's what they had all the projects in. And then also the other half was in C. So I would say that I have a pretty solid foundation in more strongly typed languages, which I see as an advantage when it comes to thinking about certain problems working in a scripting language. Ultimately, I'm sort of like still like drawn towards all the object-oriented design that I did then, still sort of drawn to patterns that I learned at that time. And I mean, I feel as though there's a benefit to learning something like that before learning a scripting language.
Yes. So you mentioned object orientation. There's kind of a big fight in the JavaScript community around whether you can actually do fully featured object-oriented programming in JavaScript. Do you fall down on either side of that?
You can. I feel as though I have. It depends on what you mean, though, to some extent. You can certainly define a really clear API and have private methods and everything, and you can inherit things from a parent. You can have multiple inheritance because it's basically polymorphic, or not polymorphic. I'm sorry. It's basically a series of objects which you can just collect and put together, and then here you have a new object from that, which you can consider multiple inheritance. I would say that you can absolutely write it in an object-oriented way. But at the same time, you're going to find yourself doing lots of functional programming, mostly because those functions don't exist in JavaScript. So.
Yeah. Fair enough. Olex, how was it that you
build it yourself?
Yeah.
That's right. So my story is that I did a tiny amount of Java and then really got into Python in high school. Built up a lot of graphs and scientific type of analysis projects, and then after my first year of college, I ran into Rails through an internship, and somebody introduced me to the book Poignant Guide to Ruby, which is this sort of absurdist introduction to Ruby.
It's excellent.
And the witty qualities of it just totally kicked in, and I loved Ruby since then. It's almost a poetic sort of relationship. But in general, I think it's almost the same as Python. I mean, I've been diving back into Python now, and I see no differences other than Python just tries to hide things that Ruby exposes to you right away. So Ruby, you just see the guts, and then in yeah, in JavaScript you kind of have to build up the word class and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you
which is, both of them have advantages.
Sorry for talking you over. I think there's a little bit of a delay, but you mentioned two things that I wanted to touch on. The first was the Poignant Guide to Ruby. So that's an amazing book for anybody that isn't familiar with it. It's a fantastic read, whether or not you're into Ruby. It'll probably get you into Ruby if you weren't before. And then the second thing you mentioned is Rails. We kind of touched on this briefly before, but can you just describe like why Rails is so popular these days?
Yeah, so I mean, Ruby is a nice language to just look at. It has, just the right amount of object-orientedness, just the right amount of functional programming built in. And Rails is a sort of, there's a word for this, omakase or something like that. Basically, it's like a collection of things that are generally needed in a big website. The sort of structure of it, model view controller, came out of maybe some prior projects, but really got popularized by Rails. And it hasn't changed in many, many years. There's just slight tweaks here and there to the syntax to perfect it at this point, and maybe a few new features, but for the most part, the core of Rails has been the same for about 5 years, and I mean, that's a rare thing in programming and in libraries. And I mean, other languages have picked up and created Rails-like libraries. I think it's all imitation. You gotta have the real thing.
So this is where we tweak it out. We know that kind of each language is its own little tribe, and I'd love to know what your opinions are on what stereotypical programmers look like in both your languages and other languages, and where would you find them sitting at lunch to sort of make it accessible to people who don't know all of the technical stuff that you're talking about. So let's start with Saul, and then kind of take it from there.
The question is, where does Python sit at lunch in school?
Yeah, and what does the stereotypical programmer look like?
I think the
Python meetup groups.
The Pythonistas are those weird guys that are kind of dorky and no one really knows what they're doing and no one really knows what their deal is, but eventually either they do something great or they leave school and go to MIT or something. Let's go with that.
What about, Jeremy, what about iOS and Swift developers?
Well, Swift developers are all very, very young with 2 weeks of experience. Yeah, it's a tough question. I think there's such a wide range of people that come to the iOS side of things that there's not one lunch table they all sit at. I think they definitely have a certain sense of style, and I think that's a good thing. But we're not exclusive of the other tables at lunch either.
Yeah, cool. Evan, can I get you to pigeonhole JavaScript developers?
It's a big tent. It's a very big tent. I would actually characterize some of the personalities in the community as very interesting. I mean, that doesn't really tell you much. They're a little braggadocious, I think, at times, but ultimately, I don't know. I can't characterize it very well.
Yeah.
But there are some very interesting personalities in that tent.
If we flip it this way, what type of person would really click with JavaScript?
Someone who likes community because you need it, otherwise you'll never survive. Yeah. You'll never come out of that hole alive.
Cool. And then Olex, what about Rails? Where does the Rails dude fit in at the lunch table?
Probably, I don't know, the lunch context doesn't make a lot of sense. But just generally pragmatic people. I think some mixture of that and the stylish aspects of iOS. I think there's a lot of crossover between the Apple camp and the Ruby camp.
I want to interject here, though. Among all of these, whether it's iOS, whether it's Ruby on Rails, Ruby, whether it's JavaScript, they can all make great sites. Like if you're going to go use one of their tools, you're going to go to a site that looks good and that's easy to read. And the same thing can't be said for Python.
Is that true, Saul?
I agree.
We're actually busy writing software and code that actually works and makes sense. It's expressive and actually just works. And we might not have the best websites, but the code speaks for itself.
Yeah. Right on. Last question.
I'm feeling a ding, ding, ding coming on right there. It's like boxing.
Last question. So I think a lot of people interested in getting into a program are doing it for pragmatic reasons. They're looking to get a job or start picking up work of some kind. What does the job market look like? Let's see here. Jeremy, what does the mobile development job market look like right now?
It's awesome. It's on fire. Yeah, there's tons of work out there, and everybody's looking for a mobile app developer. I think everybody wants an app, and there's lots of exciting opportunities for new people as well.
What does it take to, how much time do you need to spend with Swift? What does it take to get up to some type of job readiness?
So I think, yeah, and I'll speak to the Thinkful course that we're building now. I think the idea is to get at the end of the course to be able to build your own app and put it in the App Store. And I think having an app in the App Store is kind of the hallmark of having something that's kind of job ready. You can download it and people can see it, and it's kind of like a little working resume. So that's a good indicator of where you're at.
Yeah, cool. Evan, what about you? You were recently in the job market as a JavaScript developer. What's that look like right now?
It's also a big tent. There's a lot of work, and I would say that the majority of it is not interesting. But there is interesting work, most definitely. Unfortunately, JavaScript can do many things, and many of the things it's employed to do are fairly tedious. For example, advertising. It's not. There is a growing community that does back-end work with JavaScript, but it's still fledgling and young. So.
Yeah, it's small. It's vocal, but it's small. Saul, what does the Python job market look like, and what variety of employment would you be looking at?
So I think the market out there is really competitive. There's a lot of demand. I'd say the market for Python is a little bit narrower than both Ruby and definitely JavaScript. But at the same time, I think there's less of that, maybe less desirable work Evan was talking about. One important part, especially if you're approaching this from a career change standpoint, is the fact that at least last time I heard, both Ruby and Python are paid around the same amount, and JavaScript's lagging behind for probably 10, 15K a year. So if that's something that is important to you, you probably should be looking at either Python or Ruby.
Unless you have Angular on your resume right now.
We got another question.
Angular probably gets paid higher.
Angular and Node would be an exception, yeah.
We had a question from Linda on the internet who asked, so why write in Python and Flask? And I think Saul, you gave one reason, which is the money, but is there anything else that you've got?
Sorry, what's the question again?
So why write in Python and Flask?
Why write in Python and Flask? Because it's really easy to get started and get the thing going. You can write a Flask server in probably 1 or 2 lines of code, minus import. So you can get going really fast, and it's really flexible. So the startup cost is minimal, and you'll get going. Whereas, say, Rails, you're going to have to start your project. The project starter is going to create some files for you that you don't know what they do. So it's a different approach. I'd say Flask is really, really simple, and you can get going. I see Olex really annoyed by this, so let him speak about Sinatra for a second, I guess.
So Ruby has a smaller library. Basically, Ruby and Python both have a wrapper around HTTP, which is the protocol to go from the web between the server and the client, and so does JavaScript. They all have a really nice library for that, and on top of that library alone, you can build a server in just a few lines of code. So in Python, you would use Flask. In Ruby, you would use Sinatra. In Node, you would just use raw Node without any additions.
You would use Connect or Express.
Yeah, Connect.
You could use raw, but
yeah. And Olex, let me also.
I think the important part that I want to talk about for the job market is that which language you know isn't necessarily going to be the best selling point. Like if you know JavaScript but you don't know CSS and you can't make a front end, that's probably not going to be good for your resume and for your job prospects. If you know Python but you don't know anything about statistics, or you're bad at HTTP and just general server programming, you're not gonna get a job. If you know, at the same time, if you know Rails without understanding what Ruby is, and being able to use Ruby outside of Rails, you will probably have a hard time as well. So, and all of these rely on other technologies like the command line, Git, front ends, and CSS. There's a lot of other skills that are important to getting a job, other than just your knowledge, and specifically which language you're familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, guys, we've been distracting you from your work, and I know Evan is chomping at the bit to get back. So thanks, everybody, for joining us today. I had a lot of fun hanging out. This will be on YouTube for anybody that jumped in late. And
we'll be doing the exact same thing next week, and hopefully the ferns will be a little bit more visible, but we appreciate it, and we've had a blast, and look forward to chatting.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.